I'm 29 years old, I make six figures at my job, and my parents still track my every move through life 360 like I'm some rebellious teenager. But that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that I let them control where I live, where I work, and now they're about to destroy the only real relationship I've ever had. My name is Ophelia, and I'm about to tell you how being a successful adult means absolutely nothing when you're still terrified of your own father. You might be wondering how someone like me, someone who manages a team of 15 people and makes decisions worth hundreds of thousands of dollars every day, could be so powerless in her own life. Trust me, I ask myself that question every morning when I wake up in this house that I hate, in this neighborhood that feels like a prison, knowing that my boyfriend Atlas is about to spend 2.5 hours in traffic just to get to work because my parents decided this was the right place for us to live. 5 years ago, when Atlas and I decided to buy our first house together, I thought it would be the beginning of our independence. We were both 24, fresh out of college, and deeply in love. Atlas had just landed his dream job as a software engineer at a startup downtown, and I was climbing the corporate ladder faster than anyone expected. We spent weeks looking at houses online, dreaming about which rooms would be the nursery for our future kids, arguing playfully about whether we needed a 2-car or 3-car garage. "Ophelia, look at this one," Atlas would say, pulling up listings on his laptop while we sat on his tiny apartment couch, sharing Chinese takeout. "It's got that big backyard you wanted, and it's only 20 minutes from both our jobs." His eyes would light up when he talked about our future, about the life we were going to build together. We'd stay up until 2 in the morning, browsing real estate websites, calculating mortgage payments, and planning our perfect life. Those were the happiest months of our relationship. We felt like adults, like equals, like partners making decisions together. Atlas would drive me to work in the mornings, and we'd listen to podcasts about home improvement and financial planning. He'd kiss me goodbye in the parking lot and say, "One day closer to our house, babe." I felt so loved, so supported, so ready to take on the world with him by my side. We had plans, real plans. We wanted to get married within 2 years, start trying for kids by the time we were 27, and build the kind of life that our friends would envy. Atlas came from a normal family where disagreements were handled with conversation, not control. His parents, Ruth and Benjamin, would visit us and ask about our house hunting with genuine excitement. "Have you found anything you like?" Ruth would ask over dinner, and when we'd show her pictures, she'd say things like, "Oh, that kitchen is gorgeous. You two would be so happy there." They treated us like adults capable of making smart decisions. But then I made the mistake of mentioning our house hunting to my parents during Sunday dinner. My father, Maximus, set down his fork and looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes that I'd learned to fear as a child. "You're not ready to buy a house, Ophelia. You don't know anything about real estate or neighborhoods or property values." My mother, Cordelia, nodded in agreement, as she always did when my father spoke. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. When I was in high school and wanted to apply to colleges outside of our state, Maximus had shut that down immediately. "You're not mature enough to live that far from home," he'd said. When I wanted to study abroad during college, he'd found reasons why every program was too dangerous, too expensive, or too impractical. When I'd gotten my first job offer in another city, he'd convinced me that the local opportunity was better for my career, even though it paid $20,000 less. The pattern was always the same. Any decision that would give me independence, that would put physical or emotional distance between us, was somehow wrong, dangerous, or premature. But I'd always rationalized it. "They love me," I told myself. "They just want what's best for me. They have more experience than I do." "Dad, I'm 24 years old and I make good money. Atlas and I have been saving for 2 years, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But even as I spoke, I could feel my confidence cracking under his stare. "You think you know better than me?" His voice was quiet, but that made it more terrifying. When Maximus spoke quietly, it meant he was truly angry. "I've been dealing with real estate for 30 years. You've been an adult for 5 minutes. Cordelia reached across the table and squeezed my hand, but her touch felt more like a warning than comfort. Looking back, that should have been the moment I stood up and walked out. That should have been the moment I told my father that I was an adult capable of making my own decisions. Instead, I found myself nodding and saying, "Maybe you're right. Maybe we should wait a little longer." The next week, when Atlas excitedly showed me a perfect 3-bedroom house with a huge kitchen and a basement perfect for his gaming setup, I heard myself saying, "My parents think we should look at different neighborhoods. They know more about property values than we do." I watched his face fall, watched the excitement drain from his eyes, but I couldn't stop myself. The fear was too strong. Your parents? Atlas said, confusion written all over his face. Ophelia, this is our decision. We're the ones who have to live there, pay the mortgage, and build our life in this house. I know, but they've been through this before. They bought 3 houses in their lifetime. We've never done this, I said, already feeling like I was betraying him, betraying us. Atlas looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Disappointment. Not anger, not frustration, but disappointment. Ophelia, when did your parents become the third person in our relationship? I didn't have an answer for that, because I was starting to realize that they had always been the third person in our relationship. Every major decision we made was filtered through their approval. Every plan we created was subject to their veto. We weren't partners building a life together. We were 2 people living according to someone else's rules. What followed were months of my parents systematically rejecting every house Atlas and I found. The Craftsman bungalow near downtown? Too old, too many maintenance issues. You'll be throwing money down the drain. The modern townhouse in the trendy arts district? Too expensive, you'll be house poor within a year. The ranch-style home in the suburbs near both our jobs? The neighborhood is declining, terrible investment. You'll lose money when you try to sell. Atlas started getting frustrated, and I don't blame him. Ophelia, we've looked at 23 houses and your parents have found something wrong with every single one. When do we get to make our own choice? He wasn't angry, just tired, and that somehow made it worse. I should have stood up for us then. I should have told my parents that we were adults making our own decisions. Instead, I found myself making excuses. They're just trying to help us, Atlas. They don't want us to make a mistake we'll regret forever. But what if their idea of a mistake is different from ours? Atlas asked. What if they want us to stay close so they can keep controlling your life? The question hit too close to home, so I deflected. That's not what this is about. They just want us to be smart with our money. But deep down, I knew Atlas was right. This wasn't about money or investment potential. This was about control. This was about making sure I stayed within their reach, within their influence, within their power. The breaking point in our house hunting came when we found a beautiful colonial in a neighborhood we both loved. It was 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, with a huge backyard and a 2-car garage. It was 25 minutes from my job and 30 minutes from Atlas's. The schools were excellent, the neighbors were young families like we planned to be, and it was exactly what we'd dreamed of. This is it, Atlas said as we walked through the house for the second time. This is our home, Ophelia. I can see us here. I can see our kids playing in that backyard, having birthday parties in that kitchen, growing old together on that front porch. I could see it too. I could picture Atlas working in the spare bedroom he'd turn into an office, finally having space to spread out his projects. I could imagine us hosting Thanksgiving dinner in that gorgeous dining room, having friends over for barbecues on the deck. For the first time in months, I felt excited about our future instead of anxious about my parents' reaction. But when I told Maximus and Cordelia about the house, their response was swift and brutal. Absolutely not, Maximus said before I'd even finished describing it. That neighborhood is overpriced and overhyped. You're paying for a name, not actual value. But Dad, we've researched the area extensively. The property values have been stable for years, and, did I ask for your research? His voice was ice cold. Did I ask for your opinion on property values? You know nothing about real estate, Ophelia. Nothing. Cordelia jumped in with her usual supporting role. Your father is right, sweetheart. We've driven through that neighborhood, and it's just not practical for young people starting out. Too much house, too much responsibility. We can afford it, I said weakly. We've been pre-approved for the mortgage, and our monthly payments would still be less than 30% of our combined income. Afford it now, Maximus said with a dismissive wave. What happens when one of you loses your job? What happens when you have kids and daycare costs? What happens when the roof needs replacing or the air conditioning breaks down? You'll be scrambling, desperate, asking us for money. The implication was clear: if we bought this house, we'd be proving that we couldn't handle our own lives. We'd be proving that we needed them, that we were still children playing dress-up in the adult world. Atlas could see what was happening, and he tried to fight for us in a way I couldn't. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, he said the next time they came over for dinner, I understand your concerns about the house, but Ophelia and I have really thought this through. We've run the numbers, we've researched the neighborhood, and we feel confident about this decision. Maximus smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd spotted easy prey. Atlas, you seem like a nice young man, but you're not from here. You don't understand this market, this area, these people. Ophelia has been my daughter for 24 years. I think I know what's best for her better than someone she's known for 2 years. With respect, sir, Ophelia is an adult. She's capable of making her own decisions about where she wants to live. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Cordelia stopped eating. I stopped breathing. And Maximus's smile disappeared entirely. Are you telling me how to relate to my own daughter? Maximus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Atlas looked at me, clearly expecting me to jump in, to support him, to stand up for our relationship. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, frozen by the same fear that had controlled me my entire life. I'm just saying that Ophelia and I should be able to choose where we live, Atlas said, but I could hear his confidence wavering. Should? Maximus repeated the word like it tasted bad. Who are you to say what should happen in my family? Who are you to tell me what my daughter should or shouldn't do? I should have stood up. I should have told my father that Atlas was right, that we were adults, that this was our decision to make. Instead, I heard myself saying, Dad, Atlas doesn't mean any disrespect. He's just excited about the house. Is he? Maximus asked, still looking at Atlas like he was an intruder. Or is he trying to isolate you from your family? Trying to get you away from the people who actually care about you? That's not what this is about, Atlas said, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. He couldn't understand how a conversation about buying a house had turned into an interrogation about his motives. Isn't it? Maximus leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself now. Young man moves to town, starts dating local girl, tries to get her to move away from her family. Tale as old as time. I wanted to defend Atlas, to tell my father that he was being unfair and manipulative. But I also wanted this conversation to end, wanted the tension to dissipate, wanted things to go back to normal. So I took the coward's way out. Maybe we should look at some other options, I said quietly. There are other houses. Atlas stared at me in disbelief. Ophelia, we love that house. It's perfect for us. There are other houses, I repeated, not looking at him. The dinner ended soon after that, and Atlas didn't speak to me the entire drive home. When we got back to his apartment, he finally exploded. What was that? He demanded. What was that dinner? I felt like I was being interrogated by the mob, not having dinner with your parents. They're just protective, I said, but the word sounded hollow even to me. Protective? Ophelia, your father accused me of trying to isolate you from your family because I want to buy a house with you. That's not protective, that's controlling. You don't understand, I said, feeling the familiar panic rising in my chest. You don't understand what it's like to be their only child, to have them worry about every decision you make. I understand that you're 24 years old and you just let your father talk to your boyfriend like I was some kind of predator, Atlas shot back. I understand that instead of standing up for us, for our relationship, you threw me under the bus to make your parents happy. He was right, and I knew he was right, but I couldn't admit it. Admitting it would mean acknowledging that I was still living like a child, still allowing my parents to control my life, still choosing their approval over my own happiness. It's just a house, Atlas, I said, which was exactly the wrong thing to say. It's not just a house, and you know it, he said, his voice breaking. It's about whether we're going to build a life together or whether you're going to let your parents make every major decision for us for the rest of our lives. I didn't have an answer for that, because I didn't know the answer myself. Part of me wanted to choose Atlas, wanted to choose us, wanted to buy the house we loved and start building the life we dreamed of. But a bigger part of me was terrified of what would happen if I defied my parents. So we didn't buy the house we loved. Instead, we kept looking, kept searching for something that would meet with Maximus and Cordelia's approval. And eventually, we found it, a tiny 2-bedroom ranch on the outskirts of town, 45 minutes from my job and 2.5 hours from Atlas's downtown office. The house was everything we didn't want. It was small, outdated, and isolated. The yard was barely big enough for a garden, let alone the kids we wanted to have. The kitchen was so cramped that only one person could cook at a time. The bedrooms were so small that our furniture barely fit. But my parents loved it. Now this is sensible, Maximus said as we walked through the cramped rooms. This is a starter home. Perfect for a young couple who doesn't need a lot of space. And it's such a good value, Cordelia added. You'll build equity quickly in a house like this. Atlas tried one more time to voice his concerns. It's pretty far from both our jobs, he said carefully. The commute might be challenging. A little drive never hurt anyone, Maximus dismissed. Builds character. Besides, you young people are always complaining about traffic, but you never leave early enough. Plan better, and the commute won't be a problem. I should have supported Atlas. I should have pointed out that a 2.5-hour daily commute wasn't just inconvenient, it was life-altering. I should have reminded my parents that this house was barely big enough for 2 people, let alone the family we wanted to start. Instead, I heard myself saying, I think it has potential. With some work, we could make it really nice. Atlas looked at me like I was a stranger. Potential, he said. Ophelia, this house is half the size of what we need, twice as far from everything we care about, and in a neighborhood where we don't know anyone. We could get to know people, I said weakly. We could, he agreed, if we had any time left after I spent 5 hours a day commuting to work. But it was too late. My parents had decided this was the right house for us, and I didn't have the courage to disagree. So we bought it, and I told myself it was temporary. We'd live there for a few years, build some equity, and then move somewhere we actually wanted to be. That was 5 years ago, and we're still here. Every morning, I watch Atlas leave for work at 6:15 in the morning so he can navigate the hellish traffic between our suburban prison and downtown. Every evening, I watch him come home exhausted and defeated, having spent 5 hours of his day sitting in his car instead of living his life. I'm tired, Ophelia, he told me last month, slumping onto our tiny couch after another brutal day. I'm tired of leaving before sunrise and getting home after dark. I'm tired of missing out on life because I spend half my waking hours commuting. I wanted to tell him that I was tired too. Tired of living in a house that felt like a compromise. Tired of having a bedroom so small that we bump into each other getting dressed. Tired of not having space for the art studio I've always dreamed of, or the workshop Atlas wants for his woodworking hobby. Tired of putting our dreams on hold because we're living in a house that was never meant for us. But most of all, I was tired of being afraid of my own parents. The breaking point came 3 months ago when Atlas and I started seriously talking about having children. We'd been together for 7 years, we were both financially stable, and we felt ready to start a family. But as we sat in our tiny living room, looking around at the space that could barely accommodate the 2 of us, the reality hit us both at the same time. There's no room for a baby here, Atlas said quietly. The second bedroom is barely big enough for a desk, let alone a nursery. We could convert the living room, I suggested weakly, but even I knew that was ridiculous. We'd be cramped, uncomfortable, and resentful. Ophelia, we need to move, Atlas said, taking my hands in his. We need a bigger house, closer to our jobs, in a neighborhood where we actually want to raise our kids. I felt the familiar panic rising in my chest. The idea of telling my parents we wanted to move, that their perfect house wasn't working for us, made my stomach churn. Maybe we should wait a little longer. Save up more money. Make sure we're really ready. Atlas stared at me for a long moment, and I saw that familiar disappointment in his eyes. Ophelia, we've been waiting for 5 years. How much longer are we going to put our lives on hold? I didn't have an answer for that either, because the truth was, I didn't know if I'd ever be ready to stand up to my parents. The fear was too deep, too ingrained. It had roots that went back to my childhood, to a time when defying Maximus meant consequences that a child couldn't understand or fight against. The control didn't end with the house, either. 3 years ago, my parents insisted that I download Life 360 on my phone so they could track my location at all times. They said it was for safety, that they worried about me driving late at night after work functions. But I knew the real reason. They wanted to know where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing every minute of every day. You're 26 years old, Ophelia, Atlas said when I told him about the app. You don't need your parents tracking your every move like you're a teenager. It's just for safety, I said, repeating their words. They worry about me. No, it's about control, Atlas said, and he was right. Next they'll want to approve your friends, your job, your haircut. Where does it end? But I downloaded the app anyway, because the alternative was a confrontation I wasn't ready for. Now, every day at work, I make decisions that affect millions of dollars in revenue. I negotiate contracts with vendors, manage budgets that some small companies would envy, and lead a team of 15 professionals who look to me for guidance and leadership. My colleagues respect me, my boss trusts me, and I've been promoted 3 times in 5 years. But when I leave the office and get in my car, I become a different person. I become someone who has to explain to her parents why she stopped at the grocery store on the way home, or why she took a different route to work, or why her phone was in one location for longer than usual. Where were you last night? Cordelia called to ask me just last week. Your location showed you were at some restaurant downtown until 9:30. I was having dinner with my team to celebrate closing the Morrison account, I said, feeling like a teenager who'd missed curfew. You should have told us you were going to be out late, she said. We were worried sick. Anything could have happened. I wanted to say that I was a grown woman who didn't need to check in with her parents before having dinner with colleagues. I wanted to say that their worry was really surveillance, and their concern was really control. But I didn't. I just apologized and promised to give them more notice next time. Sorry, Mom. I should have texted. I just got caught up in the celebration and lost track of time. That's exactly why we worry, she said. You get distracted and forget to think about safety. What if something had happened and we didn't know where you were? The irony wasn't lost on me. They knew exactly where I was because they were tracking my every movement, but somehow that made them worry more, not less. Atlas has been patient with me, more patient than I deserve. He's tried to understand why I can't just stand up to my parents, why I can't just turn off the location tracking and move forward with our lives. But I can see his patience wearing thin. I feel like I'm dating you and your parents, he said last week during yet another argument about moving. Every decision we want to make has to go through them first. When do we get to be a couple making our own choices? I wanted to tell him that I wanted that too, more than anything. I wanted to tell him that I lay awake at night dreaming about a life where we made decisions based on what we wanted, not what my parents would approve of. But I also wanted to tell him about the fear that kept me frozen, the terror that if I defied them, I would lose the only family I had left. You see, my parents have a pattern of cutting people out of their lives when they don't get their way. My older brother, Tobias, tried to assert his independence when he was 25. He moved across the country without their permission, married a woman they didn't approve of, and started a family on his own terms. Maximus and Cordelia responded by cutting him off completely. I remember the day it happened. Tobias called to tell them he was engaged to his girlfriend, Ramona, a woman my parents had met exactly once and immediately decided was wrong for him. She was too ambitious, they said. Too independent. Too likely to take their son away from them. If you marry that girl, you're no son of mine, Maximus told Tobias during what would be their last conversation. Don't come crawling back to us when she ruins your life. And that was it. 25 years of relationship, gone in a single phone call. They don't talk to him, they don't acknowledge his children, and they've made it clear that anyone who maintains a relationship with him is also dead to them. My extended family learned this lesson the hard way. My Aunt Serafina tried to mediate between my parents and Tobias. She thought she could help repair the relationship, bring the family back together. Instead, she found herself excommunicated too. My grandparents, cousins, uncles, anyone who sided with Tobias or even suggested that my parents were being too harsh, they all got the same treatment. It started slowly. First, my parents stopped inviting certain relatives to family gatherings. Then they stopped attending events where those relatives would be present. Finally, they made it clear that anyone who wanted to maintain a relationship with Maximus and Cordelia had to choose, them or Tobias. There was no middle ground. One by one, family members chose my parents. Not because they agreed with the decision, but because Maximus and Cordelia were the center of the family, the ones who hosted holidays and maintained traditions. Choosing Tobias meant losing not just my parents, but the entire family structure they controlled. So now it's just me and my parents. They are literally the only family I have left, and they've made it clear that my continued place in their lives is conditional on my obedience. The unspoken threat is always there: step out of line, and you'll end up like Tobias. Alone, forgotten, erased from the family history. This is why I can't just move. This is why I can't just turn off the location tracking. This is why I can't just tell them that I'm an adult capable of making my own decisions. Because I'm not just afraid of their anger, I'm afraid of their abandonment. But Atlas doesn't understand this fear, and I can't blame him. He comes from a family where disagreements are normal, where adult children are expected to make their own choices, where love isn't conditional on compliance. His parents had opinions about our house choice, but when we explained our reasoning, they said, "Well, you two know your needs better than we do." I'd never heard anything like that from my own parents. "Ophelia, you're 29 years old," Atlas said during our last real fight about this. "You make more money than both of us combined. You manage a team of people and make decisions that affect hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you can't tell your parents that you want to move to a bigger house?" "It's not that simple," I said, but I could hear how weak my voice sounded. "Then explain it to me," he said, his voice breaking with frustration. "Help me understand why you're so afraid of people who are supposed to love you unconditionally." I tried to explain about Tobias, about the family members who'd been cut off, about the pattern of control and punishment that had shaped my entire life. But even as I spoke, I could see the confusion in his eyes. He'd never lived in a world where love came with conditions, where family was something you could lose if you didn't behave correctly. "So you're going to let them control your entire life because you're afraid they'll stop talking to you?" he asked. "They're the only family I have left," I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. "No, they're not," Atlas said quietly. "I'm your family too. We're supposed to be building a family together. But how can we do that when you're still living like a child who needs permission for everything?" That conversation was 3 weeks ago, and we haven't talked about moving since. But I can feel the distance growing between us. I can see the way he looks at me sometimes, like he's seeing a stranger. I can feel him pulling away, protecting himself from the disappointment of being with someone who will never put him first. Last night, he came home from another brutal commute and barely spoke to me. He just sat on the couch, staring at his phone, and I knew he was probably looking at apartment listings or job postings in other cities. Cities where he could start over, where he could build a life with someone who wasn't controlled by their parents. I wanted to go to him, to tell him that I was ready to change, that I was ready to stand up to my parents and fight for us. But I couldn't move. I just stood in the kitchen, watching the man I love slowly give up on us, and I felt that familiar paralysis creeping in. The truth is, I know what I need to do. I know I need to turn off the location tracking. I know I need to tell my parents that Atlas and I are moving, whether they approve or not. I know I need to start living my own life, making my own decisions, and accepting the consequences of my choices. But knowing what you need to do and having the courage to do it are two very different things. Every time I think about confronting my parents, I feel like that 8-year-old girl who learned that defying them meant consequences too painful to bear. When I was 8, I made the mistake of talking back to my father at dinner. I don't even remember what I said, but I remember what happened next. He didn't hit me, but he did something that felt worse. He made me stand in the corner of the kitchen for 4 hours, not moving, not speaking, just standing there while the family ate dinner, watched TV, and went about their evening as if I didn't exist. "This is what happens when you don't show respect," he said every time he passed by. "This is what happens when you think you know better than your parents." By the time he finally let me go to bed, I was shaking with exhaustion and fear. But the message was clear: cross Maximus, and you disappear. Cross Maximus, and you become nothing. That lesson stuck with me through my teenage years, through college, and apparently into my adult life. Even now, at 29, with my own career and my own bank account, I still feel like that 8-year-old girl standing in the corner, waiting for permission to exist. The worst part is that I can see exactly how this is going to end. Atlas is going to leave me, and I'm going to be alone in this house that I never wanted, in this neighborhood that feels like a prison, living according to rules I never agreed to follow. I'm going to be 29 years old, financially independent, professionally successful, and completely alone because I was too afraid to choose my own life over my parents' control. But maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe people who can't stand up for themselves, who can't choose love over fear, who can't break free from the patterns that bind them, maybe they deserve to be alone. Or maybe, just maybe, there's still time to change. Maybe I can find the courage to tell my parents that I'm an adult, that I'm moving, that I'm turning off the location tracking, and that they can either respect my decisions or lose me the way they lost Tobias. The thought terrifies me, but losing Atlas terrifies me more. And living the rest of my life as a prisoner in my own existence terrifies me most of all. 2 days ago, Atlas came home and found me crying in our tiny kitchen. He didn't ask what was wrong, we both knew what was wrong. Instead, he sat down next to me and said something that broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. "Ophelia, I love you. I've loved you for 7 years, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that we're building a life together when every major decision is made by your parents." I looked at him through my tears and saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was resignation. He was saying goodbye. "I've been offered a promotion," he continued. "It would mean relocating to Seattle, starting over in a new city. I haven't given them an answer yet because I was hoping you'd come with me. But I need to know, Ophelia. Are you ready to choose us? Are you ready to build a life based on what we want instead of what your parents approve of?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to throw my arms around him and tell him that of course I'd choose us, that we could start over in Seattle and build the life we'd always dreamed of. But the words wouldn't come. All I could think about was telling my parents that I was moving across the country, and the inevitable aftermath of that conversation. I need time to think, I said, which we both knew was code for, I'm too afraid to say yes. Atlas nodded like he'd expected that answer. You have until Friday, he said quietly. I have to give them my decision by Friday. That was 2 days ago. Today is Wednesday. I have 2 days to decide whether I'm going to choose love over fear, freedom over control, my future over my past. I know what the right answer is. I know that Atlas loves me, that he's offering me everything I've ever wanted, that this is my chance to break free from the prison my parents have built around my life. I know that if I say no, if I let him leave without me, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I also know that saying yes means telling my parents that I'm moving across the country with a man they've never fully approved of. It means turning off the location tracking and accepting their fury. It means potentially losing the only family I have left, just like Tobias did. The question is, am I brave enough to fight for the life I want, or am I going to let fear control me forever? I guess we're about to find out. Tomorrow, I'm going to my parents' house for dinner. I'm going to tell them about Atlas's job offer, about our decision to move to Seattle, about our plans to start over in a city where we can build a life based on our own choices instead of their approval. I don't know what will happen after that. I don't know if they'll cut me off like they did Tobias, or if they'll find some way to manipulate me into staying. I don't know if I'll have the courage to follow through, or if I'll cave under pressure like I always have. But I know that I can't keep living like this. I can't keep choosing fear over love, control over freedom, my parents' approval over my own happiness. I'm 29 years old, and it's time to start living like it. Atlas deserves better than this. He deserves a partner who will fight for their relationship, who will choose love over fear, who will build a life based on their shared dreams rather than someone else's approval. And maybe, just maybe, I deserve better than this too. Maybe I deserve to live without fear, to make my own choices, to build a family with the man I love in a house we choose together, in a city where we can start fresh. This morning, I woke up before my alarm and found Atlas already awake, staring at the ceiling in our cramped bedroom. We lay there in silence for a while, both of us thinking about Friday's deadline, about the conversation I need to have with my parents, about the future that hangs in the balance. Are you scared? He asked quietly. Terrified, I admitted. Me too, he said, reaching over to take my hand. But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of starting over. That's when I knew. That's when I finally understood that some things are worth fighting for, even when you're terrified. Even when the consequences might be devastating. Even when it means standing up to the people who have controlled your entire life. I called in sick to work today. I couldn't focus on budgets and contracts and team meetings when my entire future was hanging in the balance. Instead, I sat in our tiny living room and wrote down everything I wanted to say to my parents. I practiced the words until they felt real, until they felt like mine instead of something I was borrowing from someone else's courage. Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something important. Atlas has been offered a promotion in Seattle, and we've decided to take it. We're moving next month. Simple words. True words. Adult words from an adult woman making an adult decision with the man she loves. But even as I practiced saying them, I could picture my father's face. I could hear his voice getting quiet and dangerous. I could see my mother's disappointed expression, the way she always looked when I failed to meet their expectations. You're making a mistake, Ophelia. You're throwing your life away for a man who's just going to leave you anyway. You're choosing him over your family, over the people who actually love you. I could hear it all already, and I knew it would be worse in person. They would find every weakness, every insecurity, every fear I'd ever confessed to them, and they would use it all against me. They would make me feel small and stupid and ungrateful. They would remind me of every time I'd needed their help, every mistake I'd made, every reason why I couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions. But here's what I finally realized: they can say whatever they want. They can threaten to cut me off, they can tell me I'm making the biggest mistake of my life, they can even follow through on their threats and treat me like they treated Tobias. But they can't actually stop me. I'm not 8 years old anymore. I'm not dependent on their approval for my sense of self-worth. I'm not trapped in their house, subject to their punishments and their control. I'm 29 years old. I have my own money, my own career, my own life. And if they choose to remove themselves from that life because I won't let them control it, then that's their choice, not mine. This afternoon, I did something I've never done before. I turned off my location sharing on Life 360. Just temporarily, just to see how it felt to move through the world without being tracked, without having to explain my every movement to people who have no right to that information. It felt like freedom. My phone started ringing 20 minutes later. Cordelia, of course. Ophelia, honey, your location isn't showing up on the app. Is everything okay? Are you hurt? Should we call the police? For the first time in my adult life, I didn't immediately apologize and scramble to fix their concern. Instead, I took a breath and said, "I'm fine, Mom. My phone is fine. I just turned off location sharing for a while." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "You what?" she finally said. "I turned off location sharing. I'm an adult, Mom. I don't need you and Dad tracking my every movement." Ophelia Margaret Blackwood, you turn that back on right now. Do you have any idea how worried we've been? We had no idea where you were or if you were safe. You could have called me, I said calmly. Which is what you did. And I answered. And I told you I'm fine. That's not the point, she sputtered. The point is that we need to know where you are. What if something happened? What if you were in an accident and couldn't call? What if, Mom, I interrupted, and my own voice surprised me with its steadiness. I understand that you worry about me. But I'm 29 years old. I don't need to be tracked like a teenager. The conversation ended with her telling me we'd discuss this with your father and hanging up. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about standing my ground. I felt proud. Tonight is the night. Atlas is making dinner in our tiny kitchen, and I'm watching him move around the cramped space, bumping into counters and cabinets because there's barely room for one person, let alone two. After dinner, we're going to my parents' house, and I'm going to tell them about Seattle. I'm still scared. I'm still terrified of their reaction, of the possibility that they'll cut me off, of the unknown future that lies ahead. But I'm more scared of staying trapped in this life that was never really mine to begin with. You ready for this? Atlas asks, setting a plate of pasta in front of me. No, I say honestly. But I'm ready to try. He smiles, and it's the first real smile I've seen from him in weeks. That's all I needed to hear. We eat dinner in comfortable silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what the evening might bring. But for the first time in months, the silence doesn't feel heavy with unspoken resentments and growing distance. It feels hopeful. After dinner, we drive to my parents' house in Atlas's car. He offers to wait outside, to let me have this conversation alone, but I shake my head. No, I say. We're in this together. Whatever happens, we face it together. My parents are waiting for us in their perfectly decorated living room, sitting in their matching recliners like judges preparing to deliver a verdict. The Life 360 conversation from this afternoon hangs in the air between us, unfinished business that I know they're eager to address. But I don't give them the chance to bring it up first. Mom, Dad, I say, taking Atlas's hand for strength. We have something important to tell you. Atlas has been offered a promotion in Seattle, and we've decided to take it. We're moving next month. The words hang in the air for a moment, and I watch my parents' faces change from confusion to disbelief to anger. Maximus's jaw tightens, and Cordelia's eyes narrow. Here we go. Absolutely not, Maximus says, exactly as I predicted. You are not moving across the country for some job. You have a perfectly good job here, a house here, family here. I know, I say, surprised by how calm my voice sounds. But this is what we want to do. This is what's best for our relationship, our future. What's best for your relationship? Cordelia jumps in, her voice rising. Ophelia, you barely know this man. You've been together for 7 years, and he's never even proposed. Now he wants to drag you across the country away from everyone who actually cares about you. I feel Atlas tense beside me, but he doesn't respond. This is my battle to fight, and he knows it. Atlas and I have been talking about our future, I say. We want to get married, start a family, build a life together. But we can't do that here, in this house that's too small, with this commute that's destroying our quality of life. So move to a different house, Maximus says dismissively. Move closer to your jobs. You don't need to run away to Seattle to solve your problems. We've tried to move, I say, and I can feel my voice getting stronger. For 5 years, we've tried to move. But every house we've found, every neighborhood we've liked, you found reasons to reject it. You didn't want us to make our own choices then, and you don't want us to make our own choices now. Because you make terrible choices, Maximus snaps. Left to your own devices, you'd have bought that overpriced house in that trendy neighborhood and been bankrupt within 2 years. That's not your decision to make, I say, and the words feel foreign in my mouth. I've never spoken to my father like this before. I'm an adult. Atlas is an adult. We get to decide where we live and how we spend our money. Do you? Maximus asks, leaning forward in his chair. Do you really think you're ready to make these kinds of decisions? You can't even remember to keep your location tracking on so your parents know you're safe. I turned off location tracking because I don't need my parents monitoring my every movement, I say. I'm 29 years old, Dad. I don't need to be tracked like a child. The room erupts. Both my parents start talking at once, their voices overlapping in a chorus of disapproval and manipulation that I've heard my entire life. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. You're being manipulated by him. You'll regret this for the rest of your life, just like your brother. That last phrase stops me cold. Just like your brother. The ultimate threat, the final warning. Step out of line, and you'll end up like Tobias. Cut off, forgotten, erased. For a moment, the old fear rises up, threatening to drown out my newfound courage. But then I look at Atlas, sitting beside me, holding my hand, ready to build a life with me based on love instead of fear. And I realize something that should have been obvious years ago. Maybe ending up like Tobias wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Maybe Tobias got out. Maybe Tobias chose love over fear, freedom over control. Maybe Tobias is living the life he actually wanted instead of the life our parents demanded he live. You're right, I say quietly, and the room falls silent. Maybe I will end up like Tobias. Maybe I'll move across the country and build a life with someone I love, surrounded by people who support my choices instead of trying to control them. Maximus's face goes white with rage. If you walk out that door, if you choose him over your family, don't come crawling back to us when it all falls apart. I won't, I say, standing up and pulling Atlas with me. Because it's not going to fall apart. We're going to build something beautiful together, something based on mutual respect and partnership instead of fear and control. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Cordelia says, tears streaming down her face. You're throwing away everything that matters for a man who's just going to leave you anyway. Maybe, I say, looking at her with something that might be pity. But it will be my mistake to make. My choice. My life. We walk to the door, and I can hear my parents behind us, still talking, still trying to convince me that I'm wrong, that I'm ungrateful, that I'm making a terrible decision. But their voices are getting fainter, and for the first time in my life, they don't have power over me. We get in the car and drive away from the house where I grew up, where I learned to be afraid of disappointing people who claim to love me. We drive toward our tiny house that we're finally going to leave behind, toward a future that we're going to build together. How do you feel? Atlas asks as we pull into our driveway. Terrified, I admit. But also, free. For the first time in my life, I feel free. He smiles and kisses me, and I can taste the promise of our future on his lips. A future where we make decisions together, where we choose love over fear, where we build a family based on support instead of control. We still have details to work out, logistics to manage, a life to pack up and move across the country. But tonight, I'm not worried about any of that. Tonight, I'm just grateful that I finally found the courage to choose the life I want instead of the life I was told to want. My phone buzzes with a text from my mother. We love you, Ophelia. When you come to your senses, we'll be here. I read it, and then I do something I've never done before. I delete it without responding. Because I have come to my senses. I've finally woken up from the dream of conditional love and impossible approval. I've finally chosen freedom. And it feels absolutely perfect. Update. We're writing this from our new apartment in Seattle. It's been 3 months since we moved, and I can honestly say it was the best decision I've ever made. Atlas loves his new job. I found an amazing position with a company that values my experience, and we're living in a neighborhood where we actually want to be. We got engaged last month. Atlas proposed in Pike Place Market, surrounded by flowers and music and the kind of joy that comes from building a life based on love instead of fear. We're planning a small wedding here in Seattle, surrounded by the friends we've made and the life we've built together. My parents haven't spoken to me since that night. Sometimes that hurts, but mostly it feels like relief. I'm not being tracked, I'm not being controlled, and I'm not living in fear of disappointing people who confused love with ownership. I reached out to my brother Tobias for the first time in 10 years. Turns out, he's been living a beautiful life with his wife and kids, building a family based on mutual respect and unconditional love. He was overjoyed to hear from me, and we're planning to visit them next month. It's funny how much your life can change when you finally decide to live it for yourself instead of for other people. I'm 29 years old, and I'm finally free.